Hello and welcome. Welcome back to object-oriented programming. Today's going to be kind of the finisher for the Swing intro, so we've learned how to do a lot of things. We've had a few Swing homeworks, we've had a Swing quiz or two, and now I'm going to kind of finish off the content from the last 2 weeks with a little bit of a more difficult example, and then we'll get into some of the next concepts next week. So hopefully everybody's kind of caught up to this point in Swing. If you're not, let me know. So especially if you haven't caught up on the homework that went up. So basically, you've got one last homework on this kind of section. If you have any questions on that, let me know. Come and see me. Same if you've got an extension on the previous one and you're still working on it. Come and see me if you're having any problems with that. And let's first talk about the automatic sync that's available for this course so you can follow along. So I'm going to put off showing you the automatic one for one more day, but remember we have the GitHub link there, and you have that link for how to get Git set up in Eclipse. So if you haven't already, I'd like you to follow along with that link and get Git set up. That's kind of a prerequisite to the automatic synchronizing, so you're going to have to do that anyway. You don't have to make your own repository, but you should probably make your own GitHub account because it's a pretty common thing to have. And you can visit the link and figure out how to get your code, get the code from that link into your Eclipse. That's going to be the crux of what we have to do. So anybody do that yet? I'm going to take a poll. Let's see. Anyone get the GitHub code to Eclipse? Of course, if you have any problems with that process, any problems with the tutorial or whatever, I really encourage you to post whatever issue you're having to Discord. Since everybody's doing it, I'm sure someone else has run into the same problem that you've got. But it looks like a few people did already manage to get it pulled in. And I guess I'll do another poll for you folks that got it pulled in. Was it hard? Yes. So some of you are probably looking at that tutorial going like, look at all those words. It's not so bad. It's just following directions. It takes maybe 20 minutes. So if you run into problems, then it becomes a whole thing. But again, if you run into any difficulties, just post it to Discord. And again, you're going to have to learn to use this professionally anyway, because Git and GitHub are both pretty much universal in the industry. So at the very least, you're going to have to learn how to use Git. And many Git purists will tell you that the Eclipse version with its training wheels is not even good enough, and you need to learn how to use the command line version. I wouldn't listen to them, but it's something to think about. All right, today we're going to work on a project called Monkey Memory. I'll make a new package for it, and then we're going to make our, well, actually I'm just going to copy in the basics from the Swing starter because I'm going to have a display here. Copy in the basics from the Swing starter and make sure everything runs. I'll set the background to white, or let's go with black for the better contrast. There we go. Beautiful. I'll name it Monkey Memory. Monkey Memory. So how's the game played? You've probably played it before. You might call it something else. It's the matching card game, right? It's the one where you guess a card, then you guess another. So you've guessed a pair. If they match, then they're both revealed permanently. If they don't match, then they're both put face down again. So you have a bunch of cards face down on the table. You flip one, you flip another, compare them. If they're the same, then you get to keep them flipped face up. If not, then they're flipped back face down, and so forth, right? So everybody understand how monkey memory is played. I'll do a poll. Gotta make sure that we at least get the gameplay. Alright. Looks like most people have played this fantastic game before. What do you call it if you don't call it monkey memory? There's a lot of names for it. I just can't think of any right now. Alright, so what do we need class-wise? We're definitely going to need something to represent the cards because, as you should know by now, if you try to represent all of your visual components in the display, you're going to have a bad time eventually. So I'm going to make a card class right away because that seems like kind of a no-brainer that I'm going to need something to represent the card. On the other hand, you shouldn't think that, well, just because it's an object in the real-world version of the game, that means that it needs to be an object in the code. Sometimes you have a one-to-one relationship like that, but not always. So not every real-world object has its own class. Not every noun essentially gets its own class. Sometimes nouns just end up being fields or something instead. So I'll have a rectangle that represents it. I like to call mine display. I'll have my card method set up with its constructor. I'll take an X and a Y, and I'll have a standard size for these. So we'll designate a standard size for all of them. Card size. I still see a lot of people avoiding doing this, and I understand that syntactically it's a little bit more complicated than using the number, but I guarantee you'll run into less confusion if you get into the habit of using variables instead of numbers wherever possible. And the better your variable names are, the less there's something like X or Y or A or B, the more likely it is that you're going to catch that mistake that's making things draw in the wrong place, or maybe have the wrong parameters, things like that. If I see that card size isn't where it's supposed to be, that's a really easy catch. Whereas seeing that 50 isn't where it's supposed to be, that's a really hard catch. So get into the habit of using these variable names whenever you can, and starting with them rather than replacing your variables with them as you go. If you start with them, that's a lot easier than having to go back through. And if you use a tool like find and replace all the 50s, well, there might be 50s that aren't card size, and that could be a problem too. So if you start with these, that's the best way to go. So new rectangle 2D.double, we'll take the X, the Y, card size, and the card size. Alright, now for the memory portion of this game, what do I want to use as my property for making sure that they are flipped? So we've had trouble, I think many people have had trouble with both things. They've had trouble maintaining something like a color consistently, and then in the last homework from the submissions I've seen, people had trouble maintaining something like an ID consistently. You should have thought of those the same way. So I saw a lot of people use the color as a field, but use the ID some other way. So they got the ID from like the index of a for loop or something like that. Color and ID are both just properties of the shape in the last homework. And likewise, whatever it is that I use to represent the card here, it's just going to be a property of that card. I'm going to go with color, I guess. It's more fun. So we'll go with color C. Do I want the display to be public or private? That's a question that's come up on the last few assignments, and the last few examples, and the homework. It depends. Do you want other classes to be able to move this class's display, to be able to move its shape? In this case, I don't mind that, because it gives me easier access to the X, the Y, the width and the height if it's public. There's also no other subshapes that depend on this one. That was our issue, remember, with the player and his hat. We don't want him to be able to move without his hat, so we give a method for moving him, and we restrict the base display and the hat to private so that you can't move them outside of the class. That's not an issue here because there's no subshapes. But up to you. I'm going to make the color private because I don't want you to be able to change that outside of when the color is initialized. I'm going to take the color as an argument here. I'll name it color. Okay, the most common mistake I think that I saw in terms of just object-oriented design, not in terms of like being an error or anything, was people were using the x and y variables or making their own x and y variables for something like a card. I think about half of you did that, of the submissions I've got so far. So you have x and y from display, remember? So you don't need to make a new one. You should be using the display's x and the y, the display's width, the display's height. Because if you make your own x and y, your own width and height, then you also have to make sure that they match. And if they ever go out of sync with the display's x and y for any reason, then you're probably going to run into errors. So unless there's a compelling reason why you need a different x and a different y, which I don't think there has been in anything we've done so far, then you don't want to track the x and the y. Okay, I'll leave it at that for now, although we're going to add a lot more down the road. I guess I can add the draw method too. Public void draw, we take a graphics 2D as an argument. Set the color to color, fill it. Then set the color to white and do the outline. So that fills the shape in and its outline. All right. Now, how do we want to represent the monkey memory game? So I think the temptation whenever you have one of these kinds of assignments is to start doing all of the logic that you can in the display class and then kind of extricate it when it gets too complicated. So if you run into a situation where you've got too much, then you kind of pull it out and you put it in another class. I think that's most people's approach. Most people don't end up doing that. They end up having all the logic inside of the display panel. And that's fine, functional. You know, it'll work eventually. But in terms of organization and in terms of making it comprehensible, it's really hard to make all of your logic happen in the display. And so the general rule that you should always remember is that nothing except drawing and handling input events should happen in the display. All the logic, everything that handles the state of the game, everything that handles the state of the whatever it happens to be, if it's not a game, that should all happen somewhere else. And that's a good rule in general. Keep your user interface, your front end, separate from your logic. Right? So the user interface should just handle drawing things and receiving inputs. When it receives an input, it should pass it to something that's responsible for handling logic. So I'm going to create a class that's responsible for handling the monkey memory game. I'll just call this game manager, which is a really generic name, and I can probably do better, but I'll leave it at that. Okay, so what do you need in order to play a game of monkey memory? Where you definitely need that array of cards. I guess I should create a variable that tracks how many cards you want to play with. Either that, or I can take it in the constructor and make differently sized games. Let's do that because we haven't had a lot of examples of that. So I'll create the array up here, and then I'll have a constructor that takes an integer of how many cards you want. Now, what do I want to name this if I want an integer for how many cards you want? If I name it cards, is that a problem? I think it's a problem because it's confusing. I don't like having two variables of different types with the same name. So I would go with something like num cards. I would go with something like num cards instead. Okay, what's the line to create an array of num cards size? So what's the line to create a cards array of num card size? Right, so the answer that we got in Discord is correct there. We're just trying to make don't buy Razer keyboards. We're trying to make an array of num card size there. And what else do we have to do before we are done kind of setting up the cards array? What else do we have to do? What else do we have to do? We have to initialize all the cards, right? To get the game started. Okay. So first I want to point out that there's an edge case here we need to think about. There's an edge case here that breaks the game that we need to consider. So I want you to think about it. And let me know in either chat if you can think of what it is. What's the problem? What input could we get that makes monkey memory not play properly? Aside from the obvious ones like a negative number of cards or 0. So if we really wanted to handle those, and we probably ought to, we should say something like if num cards is less than, let's say 2, which is the fewest amount of cards you could probably play with, then we want to just set it to 2. Just override it to a default. Do something like that. Handles negative, 0, or 1 cards. Right. So somebody said that we need to handle the case where num cards is odd. Right. So what happens if num cards is odd? Then you have one card that doesn't have a pair, and when you have a card that doesn't have a pair, you can't finish, because you can't flip all the cards over. So if one of the cards is odd, we can't finish. What do we do? So if we've already passed this check for negative, 0, or 1 cards, let's check for odd numbers as well. So how do we check for odd numbers? How do we see if num cards is odd? What is this odd check here? How do we check if num cards is odd? Yeah, we want to check if the mod 2, so mod is the remainder of division, right, is equal to, not equal to 0. Okay, and as the comment there indicates, I'm just going to add 1 to it in that situation, and then that's going to make it even. Now there's some other really specific edge cases we could handle, like you give it max int or something, but we're not going to deal with those for now. There we go, mod 2 not equal to 0. Okay. And that should build the card array properly. Notice I had to do all of that before I made the card array, otherwise it would have been made with the wrong length. So now I have to instantiate all the cards and start the game. So let's make a method for that. I can call it start new game. Okay. And I want to create a new set of cards where each card has one, what do I want to call it? Brother card, one identical, one card, one pair, an identical color, somewhere in the, then I'll reference it, cards array. So I want to create a new set of cards where each card has one pair with an identical color somewhere in the cards array. How do I do that? How do I make sure that each card has a pair? Different kind of instantiation than we've ever done before. So I equals 0, I is less than cards.length, I plus plus, so I want to do cards of I equals new card, but then what do I do for the rest of it? What do I do for the rest of it? How do I make sure that there are 2 of every color in the array? Any ideas for how to make sure that the array contains 2 of every color? One approach you might think of is that rather than going by 1s, I go by 2s here. So I count by 2s and I generate the cards in pairs like that. That would be fine, except that if I use this same loop to designate the x and the y locations, then those 2 cards are always going to be next to each other. So that's not particularly great. Can I still pull it off that way? Sure. I just have to shuffle their positions. Something that we also haven't done before. So that's one way I might do it. Any other ideas? Most people probably gravitate towards a solution that involves some kind of randomness. So it picks a card, it picks another card at random. You could do that. So I can make an array of possible colors. What would that do? What can I do with an array of colors? Link that to each pair. So what I could do with an array of colors, I could make an array of colors that's the same length as the cards array, and I could pick colors from the colors array as I make the cards. But what's to stop me from picking the same color twice? Well, I could remove them as I pick them. Okay, and that's kind of the randomness-based approach. But then if I try to pick a color that isn't there, I have to repick. Once we get down to the small number of cards, small number of colors, that's going to require lots of repicks. So that's not ideal either. There's going to have to be some randomness, right? Because you want to shuffle the deck. Eventually, you want to shuffle the hands, the cards that are displayed to the screen. So any other ideas? Well, let's go with the pair-based approach then for now. We'll do this pair-based approach. Now this loop shouldn't have any issues because the arrays are always going to be evenly length, so plus equal 2 shouldn't have a problem, but we'll see if that causes any issues down the road. So I'll do my quick random color generation. Okay. And then I want to specify the cards, but at this point I actually don't care what position they're at. So this is something that we haven't done too often, but it's something to consider, is that sometimes when you make an object, you don't care about something in its constructor. You're going to set it up later. So sometimes that's the case. Sometimes you want to give it a placeholder value. So I'm going to set the card at I and the card at the next index to the same color. And then we'll go on to the next pair, the next set of two. There is a, like, 5 in 17 million chance that we pick the same random color, since there's only 17 million RGB colors, but I'm going to roll with that not being an issue. That ought to be fine. So there are definitely some more elaborate algorithms for pair generation like this too, and something you can look into if you want. But I think this is the simplest, so we're going to roll with this one. Alright, so if that starts the game but doesn't place them, then I'm going to need another method that shuffles the positions, shuffles card positions. Okay, so places all the cards in random but unique positions on a screen of the given width and height. Places all the cards in random but unique positions on a screen of the given width and height. Alright, how do I accomplish that? We'll take a width and a height here as an argument. Another thing that we could do that we haven't done before, and I'll point this out, so we have our display class and it has a width and a height. Instead of taking a width and a height as an argument, we could take a display as an argument. Let's try that out on a given display panel. Let's see how we could do that. Alright, so if we are shuffling all the cards to random positions based on that display, how might we shuffle them? How might we put them all in different places? I still want them to be regularly spaced, so if I have my one card here, then another card just over to the side of it, I don't want them to be just spread all over the screen completely randomly. I still want them to have some semblance of order. Okay, so how do I shuffle them to random locations? Your first thought might be to place them in different places randomly, so to give them different x and y values. Okay, but what's easier than giving them x and y values in an inconsistent way? Because we know how to place cards in a grid all sort of side by side. Let's do that first, actually. Let's say for I equals 0, I is less than cards.length, I plus plus. We want to, let's say we want to place them in an ordered fashion. So we've done that before. We have an int and x, an int y. We start them off at 0. Okay, and we would say cards of I dot, how do we change the cards x position? Cards of I dot what? How do we change a card's x position? I'll let you see card for a minute. Yeah, we need to access the display. And if you find that clunky, which I would agree it is, then you can always write a method for it. So you could write something like public void place card at double x, double y. And you can set the display here instead of there. So display.x equals x, and display.y equals y. If you find that more readable, then I agree with you. Do it that way. Perfectly fine. So let's do that. Let's call it cards of I dot place card, and then we'll place it at xy. X is going to go up by the card's size, which we can access from the class because I made it static. So x plus equals the card size. If we want to do some kind of padding, we should probably do that too. I'll go ahead and add a padding here. There's the same padding as before. Okay, and like we did previously, if x plus the size of a card is greater than the width of the display, how do we get the width of the display here? Now that we're taking a display instead of a width and a height directly, how do we get the width of the display that we're trying to accommodate here? Yeah, it's the display's width. The display is called D, so we're just looking for D dot width. But width is a little bit of a misnomer for the display class. The width is, if you read the description, the flag in the info flags argument to image update that indicates the width of the base image is now available. That does not sound at all like what we're looking for. We're looking for get width, which is returns the width of this component. So I saw at least one person accidentally use the other width and get stuck on it for a while. It's not that one. Okay, then we're going to add to the y instead. And we'll reset x back to 0. So we've done that before. That's how to place them all sequentially. And now that we've brought that all together, I'm going to add that to the display and make sure everything renders correctly and all that good stuff. But how do we get them to shuffle? How do we get them in different positions? Because at this point, the same colors are just going to be on top of each other. That's not interesting. So I'm going to make a new game manager up here. What does a game manager take as an argument? It takes how many cards you want to play with. So let's say I want to play with 40. Okay. I want to, in the constructor, I'll start a new game. And I'll shuffle the card positions. Here we're going to have a dangerous bug. How do I pass the display into shuffle card positions? How do I pass this display as an argument into shuffle card positions? What do I need to put in there to pass the display as an argument into my manager? Yeah, it's this, because we're passing this display in. Alright, and then make a note of this. To do. There'll be a bug here. Think about what it is, because it's a very subtle bug, and it has to do with a feature of swing that's relatively annoying, so think about what it is. Okay, do I have anything in my manager to draw all the cards? No, I forgot to make that, so let me make that too. Public void draw all cards. Or I can just call it draw. Graphics 2DG draws all the cards in this game to the screen. I'm going to use the same for loop I have here, and we're just calling the cards draw method. So I think we've done this plenty of times before. So I'll just go over it pretty quickly here. We're calling the cards draw method. Okay. So at this point, I could push my code that I have so far to the GitHub branch there, and I'll just push it and say this is monkey memory v1, up to the display part. Let me actually get it up to the working portion by adding that manager.draw call. So if we run this now, we should at least see some cards. Cool, we obviously have that bug there, which we'll fix later. But up to the first display part, let's say, in my commit message. And when I push this to the GitHub directory there, you'll see it come up, and now you can import it into your Eclipse by either cloning the repository again or by pulling from it, so fetching from it. And you can give that a shot if you've already set Git up. See if you can fetch what I have so far into your repository. Okay, so what's the bug? Anybody think about it yet? What's the bug? Why do they come up like that instead of being dispersed around the screen? What's going on? I'll go to the shuffle card positions method and give you a second to think about it. What's the bug? I've definitely seen people in the past, when I've taught swing before, struggle with this one for hours. If any bug is a bigger source of frustration in swing, I don't know it. I think this is probably the most annoying swing feature. I always go over it repeatedly. I've gone over it a few times in this class already, but somebody inevitably forgets because it's very easy not to notice it. What is the bug? No stupid ideas, so if you have any idea at all, just put it in Discord. If you're wrong, you're wrong. It's not a big deal. Shoot for the stars. What do you think it might be? So again, it's in shuffle card position somewhere. This is fine. We are correctly passing the display and everything. Somewhere in shuffle card positions is a bug related to swing's functionality. Maybe a little bit of a hint from how everything happens to draw. The fact that it draws in a single vertical stack, so every square is on its own row. That might help diagnose it a bit. The display's width or height hasn't been set yet. Yeah, that's pretty much the right answer, but what's the line? What's the problem? Just highlight the line where the error is, or the command where the error is. So if that's your whole shuffle card positions function, what line is the problem at? This one, the if statement, right? Okay, so again, one more time, why that's a problem. In the constructor for panel objects, including our display here, the width and the height are not set up yet until the constructor is completely finished. Okay, so since we created our manager at the top, but we executed these methods here in the constructor is not done yet until these methods are done. And this call to getWidth will return 0 until the constructor is completely finished. So you can't use getWidth and getHeight for a panel until the constructor is completely done. So in the past, we've passed width and height as arguments to kind of sidestep this issue, and we've just used the width and the height that we get that are going to be set up as the width and the height soon. The alternative is to just use your shuffle card positions elsewhere. And really, you should have it in the paint component method anyway, because if the screen is ever resized, shuffle card positions will resize it accordingly, which was the bonus for the other homework. Whee, look at it go. Nice. Okay. So that gets them displaying to the screen, but again, they're in pairs, and I want to shuffle them. So we'll call this something else. I'm going to refactor it and rename it to, let's call it place cards on display, something like that. And this is going to place all the cards to fit inside, to fit inside the given display. Okay, but I still need that functionality to shuffle the deck, or shuffle the cards. Call it shuffle cards. And I've gotten pretty deep into the hints here in the sense that it's a shuffle. That's what we're trying to accomplish here. So how do we shuffle a array of cards? You've probably had something similar in 128 where you've had to deal with arrays of less complicated things, maybe integers or strings. You should be able to do all that same stuff with objects. How do you shuffle an array of objects so that they swap places randomly? So I'm going to shuffle just some arbitrary amount. I'm shuffling twice as many times as there are cards. And I'm going to go from I equals 0 to I is less than shuffles. So I'm shuffling twice as many times as there are cards, and I want to just swap 2 cards that many times. I want to swap 2 cards, and that's a shuffle. Alright, so this is going to shuffle the deck so that all cards are at random indexes. So I'm going to shuffle the deck so that all cards are at random indexes. That means I'm going to create a loop, go some number of times, and just swap 2 cards that number of times. So if I do that enough times, eventually I'll end up with a randomly generated deck. So imagine you have a deck of cards, you pick 2, swap their positions, pick another 2, swap their positions, pick another 2, swap their positions. If you do that 50 times, you're going to have a randomly ordered deck eventually. How many times should you do it? Well, the bigger your deck is, the more times you should do it if you want to get a really random orientation. So I've gone with twice the number of cards you have in your deck. So if you have a 50-card deck, you swap pairs 100 times. But you can have picked any number for how many shuffles that you want to do. You could have probably picked 1,000 or something. All right, so how do I swap 2 cards so that the index at 1 becomes the index at 2? So I'm going to go with generating the random numbers while you think about it. So let me know in either chat, how do you swap cards at 2 indexes? So int first. what happens if I accidentally, or by chance, pick the same index twice? It swaps with itself and nothing happens. So no big deal there. So I want to make a hold card. So I'll have a card hold. Card hold is what? One of these, right? Let's say it's cards of first. Now what? A lot of people call it temp or something too. So this is a placeholder value. We're going to hold the value of the first card, which is a full-blown object, but that's fine. It's no different than dealing with any other kind of thing that we have to shuffle. So, I made a hold card. Now what? Now I swap the card at index first with the card at index second. Now's the proposal in Discord. That doesn't quite get them swapped, but I could have changed that previous line. Alright, let's see if that solution works. So cards of first equals cards of second. Cards of second equals hold. What was the purpose of hold? Well, when we do this line, right, when we set the first index to what we had in the second one, that obviously overwrites the value of the first card. So we had to temporarily hold it somewhere so that then we could set the second index to that value in this line. So again, in this line here, when we set the first index to what we had in the second index, obviously what's in the first index is gone, but we had already set it to a temporary variable here, and then we set the second index to what we had in that temporary variable. So this accomplishes the swap. Let's see if that gets our game going the way we planned. So I'm going to swap after starting the new game. So this is our shuffle cards method. Let's see what it looks like. Look at that. Now, is every color here represented with a pair? Do you see any colors that don't have a pair? I see this dark green has a pair. This guy is either paired with this or this. It's hard to tell based on the color. These two are paired. These reds are paired. Those are paired. These pinks are paired. These maroons are paired. So everything has a pair, and the pair is in a random position. Some of them didn't get shuffled. That's always a possibility. We can add more shuffles to make it less likely for that to happen. But this is good enough for randomly generated. Okay. Another thing I'm going to add, because I don't really like how that display looks, is rather than starting x at 0 and y at 0, I'm going to start them off at padding. That lets us have a little bit of padding on the top and the bottom of the screen, right at the beginning there. Well, we use doubles, might as well be consistent. Alright, so that gives us that little bit of padding from the edge here. And then I want to get a little padding in subsequent rows too, so rather than setting x equal to 0 at the start of any row, I'm going to set that equal to padding as well. And that gives me that little spacing from the edge there, which is a little better aesthetically. And of course, this still resizes, and when it resizes, the colors don't change. So that's going back to the bonus in that previous homework that you had. Okay, but obviously to play Monkey Memory, they've got to be face down initially. Okay, so let's go back to my card. We have the same kind of functionality that we want to do from the homework 4, the one where we want them to have a variable that determines whether they're flipped right side up or not. So I'll have a Boolean that determines whether they're flipped, and it'll be false by default. If the card is flipped, then we're going to draw it in its hidden color and everything. And otherwise, it's going to get drawn in white. Or black. It has a white outline, so I guess we can go with black. And just like last time, if you look carefully, you'll see that these two lines repeat in both branches of the if statement, so we should pull those outside of the if statement, because they are common. So we should always try to refactor for brevity when it doesn't damage readability. Alright, so none of the cards are flipped, they're all black by default. Now we have to handle clicking on them next. Okay, we have to handle clicking on them next. So let's go to our display and handle the clicks. I guess we should write the methods in each of the respective classes first. So we want that contains method that takes a point. Okay. And then we probably want to do something similar in Game Manager to handle clicks. So last time I showed you that you can make a method like handle clicks and do all of your logic changes there. I encourage you to do something like that in every situation where you have to handle a click point. So I'm going to loop through all the cards and handle the click point and do whatever it is that I'm going to do to update the card state and update the game state with what happens when you click. So this is probably going to call the cards of i.contains method. And then we're going to do something. We're not sure what yet. For now, let's just print out I so that we can verify that everything is working. Always better to do your work in little steps like this and check that everything is working as you go, rather than having it fail catastrophically after half an hour of changes. So let's go back to the display and handle that click event. That's our manager dot handle click e.getPoint. And I'm going to rename this actually because handle clicks isn't accurate. I think it should be handle click. Handles a single click. I use the refactor tool again. That's right click, refactor, rename. And that changed it both here and in the Game Manager class without me having to follow through both places. Okay, so do I get I to print out when I click? Yes, I do. I've got my 0 up there. That's 39. There's 40 cards, remember? So 39 is the last index. Click them, and there I go. What's next? In either chat, tell me, what do you think I should do next if I'm trying to implement Monkey Memory? What would you do next? What functionality, what would you try to do next? What would you do next? I think this is the hardest thing for people to grasp when they're dealing with object-oriented programming is what do I do next? With everything not represented in a single class, and there's no kind of top-to-bottom approach where you just write the next thing, especially since you're used to coming from the 128 logic where everything is very incremental. You solve this method, then you solve this one, you solve this one. It's very hard to answer the question of what do I do next when I have a very big abstract task to complete. So what do you do next? What's your idea? What do you think? What do you do next? There's no wrong answer, so again, whatever you think, either chat, let me know, just tell me what do you think you would do next. And I'm going to push this to our repo for anyone who's following along. So I added quick functionality. And shuffling. If you refresh the GitHub page, you'll see all this has been added to it. What next? So my advice is when you're thinking about what to do next, just start working on the next feature that you think you can handle. Just work on features one at a time. Once you start working on a feature, you're going to guess where the code needs to go in order to implement that feature. And you're going to end up writing probably all kinds of different things to implement each feature. But the goal should always be either to fix a bug or bring a feature into play. So as you answer this question, think, what do you want to do what feature do you want to work on next? We already have a Boolean field in our card that reads whether it's flipped or not. We use that to determine how it should be displayed. If it's flipped, it should display its color. If not, it should display in black. So we've already got that done. But the goal is this monkey memory game where you pick cards in pairs and they stay flipped, and you should probably track how many there are left or how many guesses it took. So what's the next feature we want to implement? This is where we're at now. A bunch of black cards that print out their indexes to the console when they're flipped. What's the next feature that we want to look at? We can make the cards changed when they're flipped. Somebody else said make a flip method. The first way of thinking, the change the cards when they're flipped, is more the attitude that I want you to get into, the thinking about which feature am I working on, rather than which element of the code that I'm working on. Both are fine answers, no wrong answers here, but you should be working on a feature as you go. So the next feature I'm going to work on is getting the card to flip. So I want the card to display something when it's flipped. I had this handle click method in Game Manager here, so let's do that first. Let's just set cards of I and flip it. So is flipped equals not is flipped. This is a start, right? That's going to get me the ability to flip the cards over, but just at any time when I click them. Oop, I might have forgotten a very important step in my display. Gotta repaint. There we go. Okay, so that's part of the functionality of the monkey memory game, but we're missing the part where they only get to be revealed in pairs. They stay revealed if you've revealed two of the same color, and they unreveal if you didn't. So there's a few tasks to complete there, and I should probably describe those in comments so that I can remember. So in either chat, describe the tasks that I still need to complete for the flipping operation. Describe just in comment form the tasks that I still need to finish for flipping to be successful gameplay-wise. So I need to reveal cards in pairs. Keep cards revealed if the pair matches. If the pair doesn't match, hide them again. Anything else? Let me know if you come up with anything. So let's look at that first piece. Reveal cards in pairs. How do we reveal cards in pairs? How might we do that? Well, one way we could do it is we can have two cards, first and second. And this might not be the best way, just the way I'm thinking of. We can also have these be integers corresponding to the indexes in the cards array. I prefer to have them be cards so I don't have to keep saying cards of first, cards of second, so just for the typing speed issue. Alright, so when you click on a card, let's say that if first is null, then cards first is going to be the card that you clicked on. Alright. If first is not null, that means that you're clicking on the second card. If you're clicking on the second card, then we need to perform all the logic here, don't we? Right? To perform all the logic here. So, first card, cards of I. Second card, cards of I. Then perform all the logic. What's the logic? Well, let's see. Alright, so if the first card's color, how do we get the color? We can't, because we made it private. So let's write a method for it. Public color, get color, return color. Straightforward. That was code we needed to write to implement a feature, to implement comparing the colors. So if first.color, get color, and then we'll use the equals comparer. You usually want to compare objects with .equals, remember that? It's the same for string. I warned you that if you use double equals for strings, you'll get the wrong answer a lot of the time. It's the same way for almost all objects. They should be compared with equals instead, unless you want to check whether they are exactly the same object, which in this case they never will be. One of them is the first card, one of them is the second card, so we want to compare their value with equals. We want to compare the value of their colors with equals. The first card's color and the second card's color are never going to be the same object. So if they are equal, then they both stay flipped, right? So if it's the first card gets flipped, then we're flipping it. If the second card gets flipped, then we're flipping that over. If the two colors are equal, so this I'll comment it out. If the two colors are equal, then the cards stay flipped. Otherwise, the cards are both hidden again. The cards are both hidden again. How do you hide them both again? How do we hide both cards? So how do we hide both cards? How do we set is flipped to false? And really these should be setting them to true, right? We know we want to flip them. We don't want to just invert it. We know that they're going to be revealed. How do we set them to false? How do we set the first and second card to being hidden again? Yeah, we can access them through the first and second variables. So we want to set the first one to and the second one to false. Alright, let's see if this handles our to-do of revealing cards in pairs. Well, that did something, but it doesn't look like it's doing quite what I planned for it, does it? Let's see that again. So, 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. What did I forget to do here? What other task do I need to perform at the end of the check? So what else needs to be done? What else needs to be done after comparing the two cards? We need to reset first and second. If we don't reset first and second, then first is going to stay that first card forever because it only gets to be set if the first card is null. So we want to reset first and second back to null so that we can use them again. That's at least one of the things that we need to do. Let's see if that brings it to a more functional state. Well, not quite, huh? The first card gets hidden just fine, and now we can pick them in pairs, but the second card always stays revealed. But that's just a bug, right? Nobody noticed that. I didn't notice it either till just now. It's just I did first is flipped twice instead of having second there. The danger of copy and pasting. Alright, so now they get revealed in pairs, but there's another problem. You don't see the second one. It vanishes instantly because it repaints too quickly for you to see it. So it's not a great memory game. But that's also a really hard problem for us to solve because we don't know how to make it delay animation until later, do we? We don't know how to do that. Yeah, but how do we do a delayed animation? Well, we don't know how to do that yet. So we'd have to come up with a workaround that we are able to do. And, you know, that's going to depend on your thinking, but I would draw just another little box somewhere else off the screen that shows what the last second card was. That's at least something that kind of works as a solution. So we'll leave that up there as a to-do. I'll put that over here somewhere. To-do, find a way to display the second card on a delay. So think about that. Maybe we'll come back to this when we learn how to add delays to things. So we've got reveal cards in pairs done. We've got keep them revealed if the pair matches. And we've got if the pair doesn't match, hide them again. But there's actually one more bug here to work out that you won't see until we get some pairs going. So let me actually rig it a little bit by making the game smaller. I'll make it just 8 cards instead of 40. And I'll try to show you the bug. Hopefully I can find 2. Alright, so there's 2 matching shapes. And, oh darn, I just got 2 matching ones again. Aha! What did I do there? I hid them again. That's not supposed to happen. You're not supposed to be able to hide them again. So what do we want to do to fix that? How do we fix the fact that you can pick cards that have already been revealed? You can also pick the same card twice as the first and second, and then it stays revealed. I win because it matches. If I click the first card and then I click that same card again, it becomes the second, and of course they have the same color, so they get to stay revealed. So there needs to be some more nuance to these if statements. What do I have to add to these to fix those 2 bugs? So, to do bug, you can click cards that have already been revealed. How do I fix it? I want to use that Boolean isClicked. Where do I want to put it in order to fix this defect? Line 83. Okay. And let's say I'm checking cards of I dot is flipped. So I want to make sure that the card that you're clicking on is not flipped in order to process it. Do I need to add it anywhere else? Let me see if I can pull off this bug a little bit cooler. Let's see. Oh yeah. I'm good at this game. So you did solve the first problem. You solved the problem of clicking already revealed shapes. So you can no longer do this, although now you have an error altogether. But you can't do the second part here yet. And we'll also be fixing that error if we fix this bug. Well, that's all the time we have for today, so I'm going to reveal it. You can head on out. We needed to check if the card is flipped in both situations, so we needed to add that to the other if statement as well. Alright, that's it, yeah. I'll upload this to Canvas and sync it to the Git repository. Next time we're going to start something new, and obviously if you didn't understand this whole monkey memory thing, that's fine. This is the hardest example we've done yet, but think about how you might display that second card on a delay as we go through the semester, or how you might display it in general. Okay, see you next time.